So, hello, Teresa. Thank you so much for joining us on the Corona Chat. Maybe you could start with a couple of words, who you are and what you do.
Sure, thanks. So I'm Teresa Perry. I'm BSI's Global Quality and Accreditation Manager. So my team has oversight for some of our core certification processes relating mainly to ISO 13485 and MDSAP. So that will cover some of our critical functions such as certificate decision making, hosting regulator audits, and verifying and monitoring our auditor competence. We also support the CE team with auditor competence monitoring and witnessed audits. Mm-hmm. And we also get involved in quite a lot of large projects across the regulatory services stream, leveraging our accreditation expertise.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so obviously we're currently in the midst of COVID. How has kind of this crisis impacted your company?
Actually, from my experience and my team, it hasn't actually affected us too badly because we're very home-based anyway. So we're quite used to working in a remote sort of situation. But for the work that we support, the audits, well, they're typically not a remote activity. So there's certainly been a huge uplift in some of the work that we do, such as liaison with regulators, interpreting new guidance documents, supporting our audit team, training them on more extensive application of our remote auditing procedures, and regularly updating our contingency procedures. So yeah, there's been a lot more things to do, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. And have you and how has that impacted kind of your role then?
So I would say my role has always been generally home-based. Obviously, we can't go into the office anymore, so we're having to obviously use remote auditing platforms more regularly, meeting platforms such as this. But yeah, that's not a big challenge for us. But it's the constant update of the guidance documents that we're getting from regulators, and having to roll that information out to our remote teams is a huge challenge. And I think in terms of the challenges that we've faced, one thing that has highlighted as being perhaps an issue is trying to manage and adopt a pragmatic approach to some of our larger clients who have multiple certifications, and the regulations and the rules surrounding COVID-19 for the application of audits for those clients are different for every scheme. Mm-hmm. So it's really highlighted that lack of global harmonisation, which is something I think we need to look at moving forward, because I don't think this will be an isolated occurrence in our future.
Mm-mm.
Sorry.
What other thing? Yeah. On the challenges. So that's one that obviously you mentioned is kind of like a major challenge, but you've had to kind of come up with pragmatic solutions, because that's the kind of world that we're in. You have to kind of pivot and be able to respond effectively. What other challenges have you found kind of over the last few weeks?
Yeah, I mean, managing the resource levels has been a significant challenge. So our planning team, for example, have had a mountain of work to do with regard to looking at all the visits that we'd already booked, rebooking them with regard to the new requirements that the regulators are rolling out, contacting our clients because many of them may be furloughing staff or temporarily shutting down, so we have to move their visits around, reacting to those regulatory requirements with retraining of staff, effectiveness of those changes in a remote way. Mm-hmm. BSI has also been supporting Her Majesty's Government with regard to the derogation process for expanding the volume of ventilator manufacturing. So we've had to ring fence some resource for that as well, from both a QMS audit and technical perspective, so that we've been able to support that 24/7. But also I think the same for any organisation currently in this crisis. It's maintaining that focus on the human element of what's going on. So you're making sure that our staff well-being is at the forefront of our minds, sure that people are dealing well with the isolation, any personal situations that they find themselves in, I think we're probably all suffering from video conference overload, aren't we? So, keeping close contact with your teams, I think, is essential at this point.
Yeah, I think that's really critical, the kind of the well-being part of that, because especially with, some people live alone, right? And with, especially kind of like back in March, when self-isolation was like a really big thing, and it was very much like, stay at home, don't go out. For those people, it basically means that they're not having any sort of contacts, if they're sitting by themselves at home. And as employers, companies have the responsibility to know about that, and then to make sure that they have measures in place to make sure that they're looking after the well-being of their employees. So it's great to hear that that's something that you guys are kind of conscious of and trying to stay on top of. In terms of your role, so you said it hasn't massively changed, but one thing that's kind of like come into play a lot more are remote audits, which have been kind of like the pragmatic solution to the fact that you can't go out and physically audit. What's the response been like from clients when you're presenting kind of the concept of doing remote audits generally?
Actually, it's been really positive, well received. You're never quite sure how well these things are going to work, but actually, the audit teams have been really agile and resilient, and have adapted to a role now that's very heavily based on information and communication technology platforms. And our clients have stepped up as well. I think there's a need to be well prepared and to have the documents that you're going to need at your fingertips, and be able to use some of the technologies such as video streaming, so that we can see some of the more challenging processes that are difficult to do remotely. But actually, everybody's really kind of worked together, and it's been really well received.
And do you envisage that kind of like after we potentially go back to normality, do you envisage that being something that potentially you could keep running, or is that, or do you expect that then it would flip back to in-person audits?
Well, I think, we need to look at what the new normal is, don't we? I don't think we'll ever go back to being how we were months ago. I think, we have now, I think businesses in general might have seen some benefits from remote working that previously they would have considered completely unimaginable. We've seen the benefits of being able to work around our families, and so that that attitude to flexible working, I think, will be more desired from employees, and hopefully employers will be more accommodating. But from an audit perspective, our regulators are typically very concerned about making sure that we deliver robust and competent audits. So there's been, I think, a natural reluctance, or perhaps we don't recognise that remote audits can do the same as an on-site audit. But now, we've got a huge body of evidence to support that process. So I'd like to think that regulators will look at that body of evidence and make some decisions moving forward about what the new normal looks like. BSI will be very keen to work and develop new techniques and practices to support that activity. And, we need to keep in mind what the end goal is. It's about keeping our focus on having safe medical devices, and that patients have good access to those. So why should we not be able to move forward with a robust, competent and consistent program of remote auditing? I think that's in everybody's best interest, really.
That's really interesting. And any other thoughts in terms of what the future might hold more for the profession? So what the world of work would look like for a quality professional, within a notified body in the future?
I think there's just that recognition that we're actually people behind the regulatory front, if you like. So we all have families, we all have things that go on outside work, and I think that recognition that we're people, and we have more flexible workplaces, more able to interact in a variety of different ways without going back to the old way of just on-site auditing. I think that openness perhaps with regulators to have discussions about what the future will look like. I think all of those will be conversations that we'll be having in the future, with a much bigger focus on that global harmonisation. I mean, that's my personal wish list, if you like, moving forward, is that we have that global harmonisation so that all schemes are working in a way that makes it much easier for manufacturers to access the market with a consistent set of documentation and procedures for the future.
Really interesting, and I definitely think that, you know, although we're in a crisis, it's been fascinating to see how companies have had to respond to that and the positives that are coming out of it, especially around stuff like flexible working, you know, caring for the employee, and the constant clash of home and work has meant, what I've seen is that employers are more understanding, you know, of working mums, of working dads, you know, of kids running in the background, and it's just become part of normality, and people are really embracing it, and I'm excited to see what that's going to mean for the future of work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Teresa, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining us here on the Corona Chat. Have a lovely day and good luck with everything.
Thanks, Eleanor. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.